Late last year, Citizen quietly released a smaller 37mm version of their Eco-Drive Promaster Diver. And what's great about it is that's pretty much all they did. So it's still the same great purpose-built, divers-rated, grab-and-go solar-powered tool watch, just a bit smaller now. Maybe too small, and that's something we'll talk about as well. Now, just like its bigger brother, what you're looking at here is a watch that knows exactly what it's supposed to be, which is a no-nonsense, purpose-built tool watch. One that gives you everything you need at an affordable price. So here, there's a focus on comfort, water resistance, readability, and ease of use / low maintenance with that solar movement. As long as it gets the occasional bit of sun, this is one that's good to go whenever you need it. So you would expect the design here to be rather simplistic and straightforward. No frills, so to speak. And that's what it is. There's a very rounded steel case that has a very smooth bead blasted finish across it, and extending out to the stumpy little lugs. The tiny sign screw down crown with its accompanying Oompa Loompa sized guards is tucked in there at the fore, while a very minimalistic closed case back sits to the rear, which, thanks to the solar movement, you never need to fiddle with, at least not for a decade or two. Honestly, the light blue strap here, which is pretty good, is probably more eye-catching than the case itself. The only exception to that is going to be the bezel, where the edge alternates from a smooth finish to a coin edge knurling every other index, which is a unique and very recognizable characteristic for the Citizen Promaster line, as well as one that's pretty effective, offering a decent amount of grip on such a small bezel. Now the bezel here is a dark blue aluminum, and the unidirectional action is only 60 click, rather than say the standard 120, but it's still very usable and the action is good. It's not the best action I've ever seen, but it's definitely better than most Seikos. And as you would expect on a Citizen at this price, it does come with the old standard mineral crystal protecting the dial. Feel free to insert your own sapphire or nothing comments here. At this point, should you expect sapphire on a watch that costs $300? Probably. But at this point, are you going to get it from a Seiko or a Citizen? Probably not. You don't really have to like it, but that is the reality here. As for the dial, there are a number of different colorways, but on this one, the 06L, it has a matte darker blue base, complete with dots and I want to say pentagon-shaped indices for the cardinal points. The indices here aren't very tall, but there is some height to them, giving the watch just a smidge of depth. And on this version, they have this lighter blue metallic framing, which easily catches the light and stands out from the flatter background. It is kind of an odd color, as is the strap, but if you haven't guessed it by now, Citizen actually classifies these as watches for women. But I think most of the colorways here, including this one, could be considered unisex, so if it's something you're worried about, I wouldn't be, as I wouldn't say there's anything overtly feminine here. Now, in addition to a metric ton of text, something you can't really escape for most name brand watches, there is Citizen's typical Promaster handset, which to me is inspired by the old Omega Plow Profs, where you have a different style, size, and coloring on each to just help your brain easily distinguish which is which. Not necessarily the most elegant type of design, but it is an effective one, and that's kind of the point, which in many ways also describes what's good about this dial. Like I said, it's not the most elegant or refined dial out there, but this is a purpose-built tool watch, and this dial is designed for maximum readability, where every element, from the indices to the hands, is distinct and comes across easily, despite that smaller footprint, proving you don't necessarily need a bigger diver. And this is also true at night when the LUME kicks in. When it comes to LUME at this price point, Citizen is often overlooked for Seiko, but you really shouldn't, as this one, as small as it is, easily outlasts a larger Seiko diver. So when it comes to LUME, you could say it's small but mighty. Now, the one exception to that whole maximum readability mantra it's got going on, and this is one of my few complaints with the watch, is the date. On the larger version, I remember the date being pretty easy to make out. But on this one, with the same proportions but just shrunk down, good luck. And as much as I hate to be that guy, honestly, they should have just made the smaller one dateless. As long as I'm being nitpicky here, another potential issue I have is with the smaller crown. For my fingers, it's a little hard to unscrew and use, but not too bad. However, if you maybe have fatter fingers, shall we say, you're gonna have an issue with this one. Although, to be honest, if that's the case, you probably should be looking at the larger version anyways. Other than that though, the watch is good. Personally, I do like a diver that has some more extra touches, like a more interesting detail-oriented case, or a dial with more depth. So it wouldn't be my choice, but at the same time, it's really hard to fault this mini Promaster for that, because it's exactly what it's supposed to be, an affordable, no-nonsense tool watch. And all those little extra touches I like really are just flair when it comes down to it. Now, before we get to it, I want to briefly talk about specs, because this one is actually smaller than a 37. The width here is more like 36.5, and it has a pretty short lug-to-lug of 43. At 11.5 millimeters, it's also pretty thin for a diver's rated 200 meter watch. And that's also a very important thing to note here. Just in case you didn't catch it before, this is an ISO rated diver, because there aren't many around at this size, at least not since Seiko killed off the SKX013. So if you do spend a lot of time in the water, this rating gives you an extra peace of mind. And as for price, MSRP here is something like $375, which we all know is ridiculous. But on the street, like say Joma Shop and Amazon, they're more like $250, sometimes even less. And we can't forget how lightweight this thing is at 65 grams. It weighs nothing. Regardless of your wrist size, this is one you can easily wear all day, every day. However, that does bring up the question on whether you should be wearing this. And for me, on my 7¼ inch wrist, I gotta tell you, this one is just way too small. And it's not just the size, but the design of the size. Which is another good thing to remember. Different designs work better with different sizes. As recently, I've gotten a few similarly sized watches that I really enjoy. But with this one, with its proportions, the watch just feels too small and too hard to read. And in some ways, that makes perfect sense, because the original Promaster sits about 44 millimeters, and I remember that one wearing a bit smaller. So it makes sense that this one with similar proportions would too. So if you have a wrist size similar to mine, my recommendation would be to look elsewhere. Now, that said, if there's one thing I've learned from the years of doing this channel, it's that there is no one best watch size for everyone, despite what some people say. It's 100% personal preference. As I've lost count of the number of slender-wristed folks telling me that anything under 45 is for children, or those in the 8-inch wrist and above club telling me that anything over 36 is a wall clock. Now, yes, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but not much. I get these comments all the time. So it's completely up to you. It's about what feels right and what looks good on your wrist. And sometimes that is pretty hard to predict beforehand. So while this one is too small for me, it may not be for you, and especially if you have a slimmer wrist. So just keep that in mind. Bottom line, this is the same great Promaster. The same great purpose-built affordable tool watch, just smaller. And if you're looking for a small, good, reliable grab-and-go solar diver for around $250, this is pretty good. Especially since there aren't really any other options out there in this size. So it's this or nothing, despite the mineral crystal. As the only other sub 40mm solar diver I know of is from Vaer. And theirs is actually a 38mm at about the same price with Sapphire. So if you're looking for smaller, but maybe not quite this small, that one might be a great one to check out. Otherwise, let me know your thoughts on this one, as well as if you can think of a watch that does it better for less. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Really helps the channel out. I'm Shane, this is Relative Time, and I'll see you next time.